cum-filled cupcakes were served to children by this teacher in Louisiana.
If you saw that video and it pissed you off, I have a way that you can help. I recently launched a crowdfunding effort to fund an upcoming documentary series that's going to expose an international pedophile ring. The documentary series and the subsequent book written by investigative journalist J. Reuben Appelman will focus on the crimes of Frank Sheldon. Frank Sheldon was the Epstein of the 1970s. He had his own private island that he abused children on. He sold CP across the planet. And he even financed snuff films in which children were murdered on camera for people's pleasure. But before he could be arrested, Frank Sheldon fled the United States and escaped justice. He never served a single day in prison for his crimes. On this project, I'm working with author J. Reuben Appelman, who published the book The Kill Jar in 2018, which focuses partly on Frank Sheldon. After he published that book, J. Reuben Appelman received thousands of messages from victims of Frank Sheldon in different countries, all across Europe, in Asia. And these are crimes that were never investigated by the police. Newspaper reports were never written about these crimes. And to this day, there's never been a full-on documentary series and book focused solely on Frank Sheldon and his role in this whole mechanized evil. Every cent from the crowdfunding campaign will go towards production of the book and series. And you can get some cool rewards like signed Polaroids from the places we're filming at, thank yous and shout-outs in the credits, signed posters, and so much more. The link to the crowdfunding campaign will be in my bio, and thank you so much for your time.
White House GIF. I don't know if you ever heard about this.
I never heard about the White House GIF, but I heard about like GIFs, GIFs, whatever.
Yeah. And I got this from a YouTuber. He's the one that first talked about it, so I want to give him his credits. Lazy Masquerade. It's very, very eerie and disturbing once you know like the backstory to everything. We already know how those scary videos, curse videos were really popular back in the day. They would pop up. We would send them to people. This one wasn't as popular, but it was mostly associated with a video called Why You Never Became a Dancer.
So that's just the whole video?
A song by a band called White House. The song or whatever had nothing to do with the image it was showing, and the identity of the woman remained unknown for like a really long time. So it wasn't until June of last year that they found out who she really was, and a lot of people thought it was fake until a Reddit user, his name was Lane Campbell 77, ended up posting on his Reddit thread that he found a book that was about a Japanese serial killer. His name was Kiyoshi Akubo. He was one of Japan's most notorious serial killers. He had killed 8 victims, one of them being that girl. And her name was Reiko Takemura. One day he had picked her up, the same thing that he did to everybody else, asked her if she wanted to be a model so he could paint. When in this car, Kiyoshi got the impression that Reiko, she liked him. Kiyoshi tried to say that, let's go back to like a motel. Reiko was saying, do you really think I'm that type of girl? Later on, they ended up going through this forest road, and he tried to force himself onto her. She obviously slapped him. She tried to run away. He caught up to her. He strangled her to death. The only reason he was caught was because of Reiko's brother. He made it his mission to find Kiyoshi. It was just one night where he...
These are the most unusual deaths ever. In 1814, a vat at the Horseshoe Brewery in London holding 610,000 liters of beer ruptured. It set off a chain reaction of beer vats, all rupturing one after another, ultimately resulting in a flood of nearly 1.5 million liters of beer rushing through the streets. It left a huge trail of destruction in its path, including the bodies of 8 people. And 5 of those people were actually at a funeral when the flood struck. This is just horrible, and death by beer flood sounds like an enormously unpleasant way to go. Next, on July 2nd, 1951, Mary Hardy Reeser decided to smoke a cigarette before she headed to bed. She sat down in a chair with it and relaxed, but the next morning, she was discovered in a very shocking state. She had burned to ash. All that remained was 1 foot still in its slipper, and her skull, which had shrunk to a teacup. This was a case of spontaneous combustion in which a person just randomly catches fire. Her house was barely touched by the fire, and there was nothing around her that could burn. This case remains one of the most shocking and confusing ever, because this woman just exploded in flames out of nowhere. Next, Hans Steininger died by his own beard. Hans's beard was over 6 feet long, and he typically kept it rolled up and stored in a leather pouch. On the day he didn't tuck it away, a fire broke out in his hometown. Hans ran from the fire and tripped on his beard in the process, and he either broke his neck or failed to escape the blaze after falling.
Car covered in bullet holes, a written confession note, and a vehicle set on fire. This case reads like the script of a Hollywood film, but tragically for one girl, this was her reality. This is the unsettling disappearance of Paige Coffey. Paige Coffey grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. She was super creative and fashionable and was very close with her mum, aunt and cousins. In 2012, she actually got married quite young to a guy that she met in high school called T. The pair moved to Hawaii due to the fact that T was stationed there in the army, but they did end up divorcing in 2016 and she moved back home. It was around this time that Paige met a guy called Patrick Samar Mason Jr., or PJ for short. Now, sadly, Paige seemed to kind of change character as she was dating PJ. She got more withdrawn and he seemed super controlling. He would regularly check her social media and keep really strict tabs on what she was doing. She always used to regularly speak with her family, but when in the relationship, this changed. She'd go off the radar for days on end and would make up excuses when the family finally managed to get hold of her. Around March to April 2019, Paige was living in Oakshore Drive in Bracknell. It was at this point that things began to deteriorate. An officer knocked on Paige's mum's door one morning and returned a bag that belonged to Paige. Her mum was quite confused about this and then was even more confused when she got a text off PJ stating that her daughter had shot him in the head. He began sending pictures to the mum, not only of the injury, but also a picture of a confession note that he claimed that Paige had written. Police obviously got involved at this point and tracked Paige down, and she was so hysterical that they had to hospitalize her. Now, PJ did in fact have bullet fragments in his head and his car had bullet holes in, but no one could prove who pulled the trigger and the reason why. Was it self-defense? Was it staged? While Paige was in the hospital, Paige told her mum that PJ had actually threatened her to write the confession note. She ended up getting discharged from hospital and frustratingly the couple carried on together. On the 30th of April 2019, Paige asked her mum for a lift to Oakwood Village. She dropped Paige off, not knowing this was the last time she'd ever see her alive. The next day, Paige texted her mum just asking for her to send her some money through the app Cash App. On the 5th of May, PJ and Paige were actually staying in a cheap motel in Copley Township, but they were evicted the following day. They made their way to PJ's job and he worked as a landscaper. The couple were then spotted on CCTV at a Home Depot store in Cleveland. Records show that they both purchased some chocolate and PJ got some brake fluid. Paige has never been seen alive again. She hasn't used her banking, her Cash App, or anything else since that day. Her family were desperately trying to get hold of her, but had no luck. Like I said though, this was quite a regular occurrence for Paige to just go off the radar and the family not hear from her, so they weren't kind of thinking about reporting this to police yet. It transpired that just prior to her disappearance, she texted her friends stating, "I got divorced 2 years ago and jumped into a relationship, got dogged and humiliated, then into another one where for 2 years he nearly killed me. I've been shot at, strangled, stabbed, beat, burnt, hard and embarrassed, and I still tried to stay. I had to ask myself why, just out of that now, so I'm trying to get my shit together." On the 11th of May was when Paige's mum really started to get concerned. It was Mother's Day, and Paige never got in contact with her, which was so out of character. We know she used to go off the radar, but to miss Mother's Day was completely different. The family got hold of PJ, who was just really unhelpful and just told them that they'd split up and he hadn't seen her. At this point, they called police, but police couldn't find anything. Later, PJ's sister told a cousin that after Paige vanished, PJ torched his truck and got a new one. Now, the cousin reported this to police, and police questioned PJ, and he claimed he'd simply sold the car, but couldn't give a reason for selling it. He also didn't have any proof, any receipts, or like a paper trail of selling the car. I actually did some digging into PJ's background and found out loads of disturbing information about not only stuff that happened before Paige's disappearance, but also since. Obviously, there's a limit as to how much detail I can go into on here, but on the Bourne investigation, there is loads more information. To this day, Paige is still a missing person, and her family are still desperate for any kind of information.
It was Christmas Eve, and 11-year-old Juliet was decorating the tree. It was getting late, and her mother called her and said she would be home from work a bit late tonight. Juliet said okay and continued decorating the tree until she was finished. She relaxed for a bit and stared out of the 6th-floor apartment window at the skyline of the city when suddenly she began to hear scratching at her front door. She then went up to the door and listened and looked through the peephole and saw a man dressed as Santa. Nervous, Juliet asked, "Who's there?" "It's Santa Claus. Let me in. I'm cold and hungry," said the man. She knew this wasn't Santa and said, "My mom's not home. Can you please leave?" Juliet watched through the peephole as the man's face turned angry and he began banging the door and twisting the doorknob. He then screamed, "It's Santa, Juliet. Give me my damn milk and cookies." Juliet's stomach dropped. She was terrified now. How did he know her name? She then threatened to call the cops, and the man finally stopped and walked down the hallway. Suddenly, the man came running back down the hallway with an axe in his hand and began striking the door with it until it broke. Juliet ran and hid in a closet. The man entered the apartment and began saying, "Juliet, my pretty, where are you?" He then opened a closet door, and suddenly Juliet jumped at him and stabbed him in the eye with a coat hanger. The man screamed and yanked it from his eye and grabbed Juliet and held her on the ground. He then whispered in her ear, "You can scream and beg for your life, but naughty girls get the axe and nice girls get the knife." Juliet's mother returned home a little after midnight and saw her door hacked to pieces. She ran inside to make sure her daughter was okay. She looked around and began screaming in horror. The Christmas tree was decorated with Juliet's organs, and her head was perched at the top like a star.
This is the face of a killer. David Katz shows zero emotion as he plays in a tense tournament against other professional gamers. 24-year-old Katz was an elite player of the video game Madden NFL.
On August 26, 2018, this man, David Katz, lost at a video game tournament. The tournament was being held at the Jacksonville Landing in Jacksonville, Florida. Now, usually when you lose in a tournament, you shake your opponent's hand, the victor, you wish them well. But in David's case, he refused to shake the man's hand that he had been playing against, and he immediately exited the building. People on the internet were already familiar with David, because in the past he had won a Madden championship, and he even got a shout out from the Buffalo Bills Twitter account. And looking back at it, this post is now extremely eerie. Soon after leaving the building though, David returned inside with one of 2 handguns that he had brought to the competition. He then opened fire while his other competitors were still playing the game, and that moment was also captured on video, but I didn't want to share it here because it's really graphic. In total, David fired off 12 shots and ended up murdering 2 other professional gamers that were there competing that day, Taylor Robertson and Eli Clayton. Afterwards, 11 people were also brought to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. In the past, David had been committed to multiple mental health hospitals, and at the time had been prescribed an antipsychotic medication. And this whole event is just another side note in the dark history of America. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
It's a very viral video, and it's a video of a dirtbag rider who found a missing girl.
I've seen this video.
It's here?
Sorry? Yeah.
In the video, he says he thinks he just saw a girl named Carly Gouset. But the only thing was, that wasn't actually Carly Gouset. He basically used that as like clickbait, and it was just misinformation that spread like wildfire. Carly Gouset was actually a 16-year-old girl who went missing back in 2018. She told her family that she was going to go to a football game at her high school. But in reality, she lied to her parents, and she ended up going to a party with her boyfriend and another friend. During the party, she ends up smoking weed. She starts getting like paranoid to the point where she's starting to get scared of the music, scared of her boyfriend, and she ends up calling her stepmom to come pick her up. Stepmom's name is Melissa, and to pick her up at Highland Park, which wasn't really that far from her house, maybe like 15 minutes away. Melissa goes to pick her up, but when she gets there, she's nowhere to be found. She manages to find her about a mile away from where the party was at. When they get home, it sounds like the weed was laced with another drug. She even records an 8-minute convo of her talking to Carly in the means to teach her a lesson.
You're gonna kill me. Carly, listen to what you just said to me. That you're going to kill me. Don't kill me. Why would I kill you?
She starts saying she wants to go to the hospital, but the parents never take her to the hospital. It gets to a point where Carly ends up going to sleep. Stepmom wakes up for the day. She sees that Carly's phone is on the counter, the door is slightly open, and Carly's missing from her bed. She's gone. This is where like everything doesn't really make any sense, because they
were supposed to be going Christmas shopping, but when her boyfriend never showed up to pick her up, things escalated into like something from a horror film. It was the 30th of November 2016 in Derby. Daniel Seggi was 31 years old. He worked in a care home in Mikolova and was actually a fan of Derby County Football Club. He lived with his dad, Jeff Seggi, who was 59 years old, and the pair both had regular contact with Daniel's mum and also his younger brother. To anyone who saw Daniel out and about that day, it wouldn't seem like anything was amiss. He was doing very normal things. He went to the bank and then he went to pick up a Chinese takeaway. However, Daniel's circumstances were far from normal. Daniel was dating mum of 2, Zoe. They'd known each other for years and gradually their friendship had developed into a relationship. Zoe described him as caring and said he was really good with her 2 boys. On the day in question, he picked up his Chinese takeaway and then was texting back and forth with Zoe and arranging to go Christmas shopping the following day. He arranged to collect her at 10 a.m. and the next day he sent her a text to say he was on the way, but he never showed up. Now obviously Zoe was a bit confused and also worried about where he could be. She started texting him asking where he was, but her texts weren't delivering and his phone was going straight to answer phone. As the day dragged on, she was just getting more and more concerned about the whereabouts of her boyfriend, so she ended up driving to his house. What she found at the property stunned her. The house was completely taped off by police. It was quite clearly a crime scene. Officers were stood around the home and were kind of reluctant to tell her what was going on. The only thing they could tell her was that they had found a body. Rumours were flying around the neighbourhood as to who this body could be. Nobody knew whether this was an accident or something more sinister had happened. It transpired that there had been a murder, and the victim was Daniel's dad, Jeff. He'd been absolutely brutally attacked. He'd been stabbed over 60 times and also hit with a hammer over 20 times. Now, Jeff's wife had actually been the one to contact police initially. She'd been trying to contact Jeff, as I said, although they were divorced, they were actually still quite close and did speak regularly. She'd been unable to get hold of him, and Jeff was very much a man of routine, so if he said he was going to do something, he definitely did, and he usually did the same kind of thing at the same time every day. He usually rang his son and attended work with him, actually. They worked together, so it was strange that they hadn't heard from him in 2 days. She rang the police and asked them to do a welfare check, which they did, and when they showed up to the property, they ended up having to break down the door, and they found the horrific murder scene. It was described as a complete bloodbath. Jeff lay on his bed deceased. There was evidence that Jeff had bravely tried to fight off his attacker before he passed away. With Daniel missing, officers had no idea whether Daniel was actually a suspect in this case or he had potentially also been attacked or murdered and had gone missing himself. One clue came from the fact that Jeff's car was missing, so they started thinking, could Daniel have fled in his dad's vehicle? Then Daniel got in contact with Zoe. He told her he'd been to A&E and he was quite jovial and jokey in his text. He'd apparently sustained a cut on his finger at work and he said he'd had to have stitches and described himself as a brave soldier. Police knew they needed to track him down. His story wasn't adding up. ANPR actually helped officers to track Daniel driving his dad's car as they suspected. He then had ditched the car in a car park in Cardiff. He frustratingly turned his phone off then, which made it really difficult to trace him. However, they scoured CCTV and did actually track him down at the Cardiff train station. Then he messaged Zoe. The message said, "I honestly don't know what's happening. My heart is broken, but also my mind. I have no idea what has happened this past week. It's like I've been asleep for a week and woken up in a nightmare. I'm so scared and confused. I honestly don't know what to do. All I want to do is hug you. I love you and the boys forever. Never forget that. You are not just my girlfriend, you're my best friend and I love you." Now Zoe actually replied, kind of comforting him and asking him where he was. Police desperately needed to get his location so they could go and arrest him. He replied 24 hours later stating, "I really want to see you too, but I can't. I'm so far away and can't remember how I got here. I have no money to get home, my wallet is gone and I'm all alone. I wish I was with you, I'm so sorry." He eventually told her he was in Glasgow when Zoe offered to pick him up. It transpired that on the day that he was murdered, Jeff had come back from work and got ready to go to bed. At around 10 p.m, he was attacked by Daniel as he was getting into bed. Daniel then casually went to pick up a Chinese takeaway, then made his way to A&E for the cut on his hand at around 2 a.m. The following day, he'd withdrawn £100 from his dad's bank account, gone and got a McDonald's, went to the bank to withdraw more money, and then went on the run. Chillingly, he was captured grinning on CCTV. He eventually pleaded guilty and showed absolutely zero emotion as he was sentenced to life. He hasn't revealed the reason he killed his dad and he was given a minimum of 20 years.
Remember when you talked about La Blancanieves?
Yeah.
If you want to just give like a brief rundown of like where it was or like what it was.
It was kind of like a Disneyland, but in Mexico. But there was a lot of bad stuff that would happen in that specific spot, and it was all allegedly because it was built on top of a cemetery, like a graveyard. And it was this one specific statue, which is a Snow White statue.
Yep.
Of La Blancanieves, and she's cursed. So warning: if you don't want to see her, you don't have to.
She moves around and stuff. There's like footage of her like blinking. There's been a recent video of a guy who was around that area exploring it, and then he sees La Blancanieves move.
Oh, no way.
No mames, no te muevas ahí.
Yeah, and they're pretty far, bro.
Is that walking on it by itself?
Yes.
Deja que mi cámara enfoque bien, deja que mi cámara enfoque bien. Deja que mi cámara enfoque bien, güey, eso no es el velador. No digas
And they run to it.
No
Bro, I don't know.
mamadas,
Those are
güey.
brave. I would not run to that.
Perdón,
They
perdón.
run to it, bro.
No digas mamadas, güey.
Nah, bro, that's
No,
crazy,
Yus,
bro.
no,
You see
no.
that, bro? We were just
You heard about the terrifying terrorist attack that was planned for a Taylor Swift concert recently. If it had gone ahead, it would have killed thousands. Taylor Swift recently embarked on her legendary Eras tour. It started in 2023 and she's been performing all across the globe. She recently graced London with her presence, and adoring fans queued up for days to get a glimpse of the star. However, this could all have easily ended in tragedy. She'd planned to perform in Vienna on the 8th, 9th and 10th of August. To her fans' disappointment though, the shows were cancelled. When people found out why, they were absolutely horrified. A 19-year-old Austrian man was arrested and was said to have links to ISIS. He allegedly plotted to attack fans outside of the stadium and had collected knives and homemade explosive devices. It's believed that when officers searched the suspect's home, they discovered an arsenal of chemical substances and dangerous devices. A 17-year-old and another suspect were also arrested in connection with the plot. Taylor actually spoke out about this and said that thanks to officials, we are grieving concerts, not lives.
If you swim in this, you will die.
100% fatality rate. Every motherfucker who ended up in there has died.
You may not believe it, but this guy is 100% correct. Falling into this is basically a death sentence. This TikTok went viral recently of a guy exploring this dam and explaining how every single person that fell into it died. You might be looking at this and thinking, wow, I could definitely swim in this easily. But I'm here to tell you, you can't. You literally have no chance of surviving swimming in this. This dam is located in Pennsylvania and it's known as the Dock Street Dam. And since 1935, it's taken the lives of 30 people. Granted, this water is not moving very quickly, so it has the illusion of appearing safe. But the way that this wall is built right here is what makes it so deadly. This dam is known as something called a low-head dam. And low-head dams create something known as backwash, which is basically like a washing machine. And if you fall into the water, you're gonna go around in circles until you eventually end up drowning and dying. Backwash is extremely difficult to get out of, so the best course of action here is to stay out of the water. So if you ever see this dam or a dam like it, never go into it.
The true story behind this real mugshot is incredibly disturbing. This is Caius V. Ovis, otherwise known as Roy Getfinski. I'm going to call him Roy for the rest of this video. In 2014, Roy was found guilty of murdering and dismembering 3 local men in Massachusetts. As it turns out, Roy was a self-proclaimed Satanist and believed he was a vampire with magical powers. According to prosecutors, Roy helped 2 of his friends kidnap these 3 men and shoot and kill them. As it turns out, one of Roy's close friends was a Hell's Angel motorcycle club member. And one of the victims was set to testify against this Hell's Angel member in an assault case in court. But unfortunately, when Roy and his 2 friends went to murder the witness, he had 2 friends with him as well. So that meant that Roy and his murder clique had to kill all 3 of these men. Their names were David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. But this wasn't the first time that Roy had made national headlines for a crime he committed. In 1999, he and his then 17-year-old girlfriend had been accused of assault. Apparently, he and his girlfriend had lured a 16-year-old girl back to their hotel room. They had then sliced the girl's back open with a razor blade, licked the blood off from the wound, and began kissing each other. Police were then called when that 16-year-old girl showed up at a hospital with a 7-inch long gash on her back that required over 30 stitches. And it was back during that trial in the early 2000s when Roy claimed he was a Satanist and a vampire with a thirst for blood. He was then sentenced to 10 years in prison with 3 years suspended. After he was released though and was on parole in 2006, he was arrested again. This time he was arrested for kidnapping and drug possession after he and another male friend held 2 strippers hostage in a hotel room. The kidnapping charges were later dropped, but he was sent back to prison for violating his probation. Then, just a few years later, he would get entangled in this triple homicide, and he was sentenced to life in prison. When images from Roy's home were shown in court, people were somewhat disturbed. Inside of Roy's house, you can see a lot of black candles, ritualistic knives and items, plenty of skulls and crossbones, witchcraft, occult paraphernalia, and a lot of knives and weapons. Now, after Roy was found guilty for his part in these 3 murders, he had some choice words to say to the jury. After hearing the verdict, he looked over at the jury and said, "I'll see you all in hell. Remember that, every effing one of you. I'll see you all in hell." And this whole story makes me wonder what else Roy did in his life that people don't know about yet. Did he have a hand in other crimes? Did he commit other crimes that people don't know about? I don't know, but this story is just flat out disturbing.
Case of Bashir McLean and his mom, Tanya Bird. On February 26th of 2013, there was garbage bags with human remains scattered around the Bronx, New York. Garbage bags were discovered by a man who was walking his dog around 4 a.m. in the morning because his dog smelled the garbage bags and stuff, so called the cops, and they don't know who it is exactly just yet.
Who the dead person is?
Yeah, who the dead person is. And then like the next day, the son, Bashir, he reports his mom missing, and he says that, he wasn't able to get in contact with her for the past 24 hours. Like, this is unusual behavior. She's always taking care of his younger sibling because his younger sibling has like disabilities. And then the cops find out who the remains are, which was his mom. They go tell him like the sad news, and when they go to the house, they smell like a ton of bleach. Alarms were ringing and stuff like that. They ended up getting a warrant. They searched the whole house. They searched his phone, and then what they find in his phone is this.
Yo, don't tell me it's a picture of his mom, bro. Bro, I saw that picture, bro.
It's a really, really like infamous picture. Literally him holding his beheaded mom in a selfie. Obviously you see him all like happy and stuff, like psycho. They arrest him. They ask him, why the fuck did he do it? What was the motive?
What was the reason? Yeah.
He confesses, and he's like, when he was a kid, like a baby, his mom...
You know the chilling child abduction story behind the Amber Alert system? It was January the 13th, 1996 in Arlington, Texas. Amber Hagerman was just 9 years old. She'd been biking around the area near to her nan's house with her 5-year-old brother Ricky. She had a new bike that she'd been given for Christmas, so she was really enjoying playing on it. Now, the pair were cycling up and down. They weren't going too far, but it was obviously a different time back then, and children used to just play freely outside. However, within seconds, this innocent bike ride would turn deadly. Ricky told his family later that he saw his sister bike into a car park and then vanish. Another eyewitness from the scene saw much more than that. A man in his 70s reported seeing the child get grabbed by a man in a black truck. The man looked in his 20s or 30s, according to the witness. The witness then obviously promptly phoned police. Despite a big search for the little girl, they had absolutely no idea where she'd gone. They kept hunting and found nothing until a dog walker stumbled upon something horrific 4 days later. Tragically, in a nearby creek was little Amber's body. She'd been stripped and her throat cut by either a knife or a screwdriver. Her body was found less than 5 miles away from where she was snatched. Now, police desperately searched for leads but came up with absolutely nothing. The local community were really anxious to try and do something to help. In the absence of being able to track down Amber's killer, a local woman, Diane Simone, rang into a local radio station. She wondered if a national alert system could be created to send information to people about missing children, like they do for severe weather warnings. With that, the AMBER system was born. The acronym stood for America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response. Tragically, Amber's murder still remains unsolved 28 years later. However, the Amber Alert created in her honour has gone on to save many more children who may have otherwise ended up dead.
Disturbing short film on YouTube, Bad Boy Oliver. And this one is inspired by the boy in the camera. It starts off with this boy, his name is Oliver, who's trying to visit his aunt and his uncle. He takes the bus by himself. Keep in mind he's only 8 years old. He arrives. He's greeted at the door by Auntie Pat and Uncle Charles. They're like, oh my gosh, we haven't seen you, Oliver, in a very long time. It's already kind of weird though because of how they're made, the facial expressions and stuff like that. It gives you a Uncanny Valley type of feeling. They show him to the room where he's going to be staying at. All you see is like his facial expression kind of change like to a scared face, and he's like, oh, what is that? And uncle's like, that's Mr. Bobo. And it's like a scary looking mouse rat doll, and the uncle's just like, oh, don't worry about it, it's just a childhood toy that we had for a very long time. Me and your father loved it. Fast forward to him sleeping now. He wakes up, he looks around, nothing is there now, and he's like saying to himself, he's not real, this is just a dream. And then it's like a little scene where Mr. Bobo is just standing at the edge of the bed looking at him and wakes up the next morning. It was just a dream because Mr. Bobo is in the same spot that he was. And then he starts playing with his toy tractor. He's like, I'm not scared of you, you're not real. Throws his toy tractor at it. Mr. Bobo falls from the cabinet and he sees a blinking red light in his eye.
Shut the fuck up, bro.
He takes off the eye of Mr. Bobo and he sees a small camera in there. Out of nowhere, behind him, the door opens and it's Uncle Charles with like a weird, emotionless face. And he's just staring at him. And he's like, Uncle Charles, why does Mr. Bobo have a camera in his eye? He's like, oh, if only you would have been a good boy. I wouldn't have to do what I have to do now.
No fucking way.
The door shuts and he's like, Uncle Charles? Like, but it's like muffled. And then it switches to the scene where he's like kind of chained to the...
These are the most disturbing cartel execution videos on the internet, part 1. This video is called Ghost Rider, and it's one of the most infamous cartel execution videos, and I really don't recommend looking or searching for it because it's 100% one of the worst. The video was recorded in September 2020, and the victim's name is Ghost Rider, and he was apparently tortured over 3 days. And he was subjected to some of the worst acts of violence you will ever see. The video is about 2 minutes long, and it begins with Ghost Rider already in a horrible state. It appears his face has already been flayed, which means skinned, and what the killers do next is absolutely horrible. They get rubbing alcohol and pour it on his face, and keep in mind, his face has already been skinned, so just imagine the stinging pain. We all put rubbing alcohol on cuts, and we all know how bad it hurts. So just imagine having your face skinned and then somebody pours rubbing alcohol all over it. After this, the killers then set Ghost Rider's face on fire, and his face is then completely covered in flames and is absolutely melting away right before your eyes. You hear the cartel members laughing and mocking him as he burns and his face melts. Ghost Rider is letting out blood-curdling screams as the flames continue. The video then skips to later on in the day or a couple days later, and Ghost Rider has been tortured and burned so severely that his whole head is basically a red skull. There's no skin, there's no hair, there's no facial features, you can't even see his eyes. And after all of this, he is still alive. At the end of the video, they tell him to raise his head, which he does, which confirms he was still alive, and I have no idea how somebody can live through all of this torture. They then set his head on fire again to make him look like Ghost Rider with his burning skull. And seeing his exposed red skull burning is a very disturbing sight. Apparently the guy was nicknamed Ghost Rider because he would do the same thing to people that he caught, which was the main reason they killed him in this exact way. This video is just horrible and extremely gruesome, and it's a video you should definitely stay curious on because in my opinion, it's that bad.
I need everyone to stop what you're doing and listen to this. This is 4-year-old Lucian James Munguia, and he's been missing from Yakima, Washington since September 10th. That evening, at around 7:15 p.m., Lucian and his siblings, along with their parents, were at Sarge Hubbard Park. Lucian was rolling down a grassy hill with his older brother when his dad quickly went back to the car, which was parked right in front of the playground, to change his youngest child's diaper. When he returned, Lucian was nowhere to be found. After searching frantically for 15 minutes, he called 911 to report Lucian missing. This was at 7:30 p.m. The Yakima police came right away, and more than 100 search and rescuers began looking for little Lucian, but there was no sign of him. This is especially troubling because Lucian is autistic and has limited verbal communication. In the now 4 days that he's been missing, the Yakima police, as well as 6 other counties and even the U.S. Air Force, have thoroughly searched Sarge Hubbard Park, any businesses nearby, which included a Walmart, the Yakima Greenway, which is a trail that spans over 20 miles, multiple homeless encampments, and multiple bodies of water. This includes 2 ponds at the park, a lake, and the Yakima River, which is also extremely close to the park. Authorities have brought in bloodhounds, cadaver dogs, have used drones, underwater drones, ATVs, dive teams, and have searched by boat and helicopter. But absolutely no trace of Lucian has been found. He was missing for 15 minutes. Authorities checked security footage from nearby businesses and somehow determined that Lucian left the park alone and walked south and east. Because of this, authorities do not suspect foul play, but it's now been 4 days and Lucian has still not been found, so anything is a possibility. The area Lucian went missing in isn't the safest neighborhood, and there have been reports of a creepy man at the park earlier the day Lucian disappeared who followed a young boy into the bathroom. But I'm not sure if this has ever been confirmed or if the police have looked into it. We just want to bring Lucian home safe. He was last seen wearing a long-sleeved blue shirt with a shark on it, blue shorts, and black Skechers. He has long black hair and brown eyes. As I mentioned before, Lucian is autistic and has limited verbal communication, but according to his mom Sandra, he will respond to his name or if you say, quote, "Do you want to go bye-bye in mommy's new car?" End quote. Unfortunately, YPD officially announced they'll be scaling back their search efforts, so it really comes down to us and the Yakima community to find Lucian. If you were at Sarge Hubbard Park on September 10th and took any photos possibly showing Lucian, please email them to yp@yakimawa.gov. Absolutely nothing is too small. There is a Facebook page tracking updates, and a GoFundMe is set up for Lucian's parents to help continue funding the search. That's linked in my bio if you'd like to donate or possibly share. Please help bring Lucian home.
This is the most notorious priest in all of Australia, Bernard McGrath. And because people roast me for this, he is considered to be the notorious offender in the most notorious religious order in Australia. And yes, he's a pedophile, of course. Bernard was born in 1947 in Christchurch, New Zealand, and his father was a butcher who was previously involved with the church and wanted his son to live a life according to God and be involved with the church himself. So in 1968, Bernard took his vows, and in early 1969, he became a scholastic and worked in psychiatric wards. Keep in mind, he had taken a vow of chastity, but he reported that during his time here, he had a sexual relationship with another man, a fellow priest named Brother Berkmans Moynihan. So in 1974, he was transferred to the Maryland School in Christchurch. The prior at the school was Brother Roger Maloney. And apparently, in his years at the school, Roger had fostered an environment of sexual abuse and terror. Roger Maloney would eventually be convicted of child sex abuse, but he allegedly forced Bernard to perform sex acts on him, just to keep his job. But even though written complaints were made about Roger and Bernard, nothing happened, and Roger was eventually transferred to the Vatican to work as a pharmacist. And after sexually abusing kids at this school, Bernard was transferred to another school for disadvantaged kids. By the way, this is a picture of Bernard and Roger, if you were wondering. So in 1981, Bernard became the headmaster of a school named Kendall Grange. And it was here where he had access to hundreds of disadvantaged boys who lived there on property. And he sexually abused a majority of these young boys. Parents made complaints that they heard that the headmaster was touching their children, but nothing was ever done about this. In 1992, however, Bernard was brought to a meeting with Father Brian Lucas. At the time, a lot of people had been reporting that priests and brothers had been touching children inside of churches, so Lucas was kind of the figurehead for the church's response, and he was trying to remediate all of these actions. And when Bernard met with him, he said that there would be a lot of allegations coming out against him, and so he was sent to a rehabilitation center in America. But then in 1993, legal troubles began for Bernard. All of his victims began to come forward, and he was imprisoned for a number of years. This would be his first of 5 different trials that he was involved with that lasted from 1993 all the way up to 2019. And in total, he would be sentenced to about 68 years in prison for over 100 counts of abuse against boys. Obviously, he abused hundreds of children, but these were just the accounts that they could prove. And some of these accounts of the abuse are absolutely horrific. I can't read them here on TikTok, but he did terrible, terrible things to these young children. So Bernard was a part of the St. John of God order, and there were a ton of different members of this order that were eventually convicted of child sex abuse. I mean, take a look here. These are just a few of the members that were convicted eventually as well. But one of the most shocking things about this case is the cover-up. So as far back as 1977, people were reporting that Bernard was touching children in these schools. And even though this was brought up to many people in powerful positions, they always transferred Bernard, attempted to silence parents and other people that were reporting this abuse. And yeah, they never reported him to police. Thank God, though, that now he's in prison. A real man of God.
These are the worst videos online you should never Google, and this is a massive trigger warning. This is the Miss Pac-Man video, and it details the final moments of woman Alejandro Eco Chubb, who was 32 years old and a mother of 3 and was involved in an abusive relationship with her partner Mario Osvaldo. The abuse was so bad her neighbors and local people knew about it but did nothing about it. On October 29th, 2018, Mario murdered Alejandra in a brutal, savage attack. Neighbors heard Alejandra's screams and rushed to the scene and saw Alejandra with horrific injuries and, in addition, had both of her hands cut off. The neighbors recorded the situation and it soon went viral on social media. The video is called Miss Pac-Man and it's extremely graphic and it's just nightmarish to watch. The video is short at 1 minute and 30 seconds long and it shows the aftermath of the awful attack Alejandra just suffered. As you play the video, the person filming, who is a local villager, is panning the camera down and focusing on a severed hand that is on the floor. In the background, you hear awful screaming and crying from other locals who walked in on the scene. The camera then pans down to the bed which Alejandra is lying on, and immediately you see how awful her injuries really are. Both of her hands have been cut off and she's been struck in the face with a machete. She was hit horizontally below her eyes and in the middle of her nose. It's so disturbing and it's hard to explain. Essentially, Alejandra was hit so hard with the machete that it made her head look like Pac-Man opening his mouth, which is why the video is titled this. But somehow she is still alive as she lays in the blood-soaked bed. She tries to scream but she can't, and her eyes dart around the room in panic and fear as she lets out horrific groaning sounds. The groans are hard to explain, but it sounds like an animal, like a cat fighting. You hear blood bubbles as she tries to breathe. The camera continues to focus on her, and the combination of the brutality on the screen, the painful sounds Alejandra is making, and also the screams of the villagers in the background is just extremely disturbing. And to make it worse, apparently her 3 children were present when Mario brutally attacked their mother. At one point in the video, Alejandra turns her head slightly as she lays in pain, and you then see how deep the gash in her head really is. The cut is so deep that it almost meets her ears. It's literally 3/4 of the way into her head. The whole video is just disturbing, gruesome, and it's something you just don't want to see. This video is definitely one of the worst videos on the internet, and even though you don't see the act committed on camera, seeing the aftermath of it is absolutely traumatizing. Alejandra was pronounced dead after the video was taken, and Mario was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the brutal crime. Whatever you do, please don't go searching for this video. It's way different than videos I explain because it feels like a real-life horror movie. Trust me when I say this, just please don't search it up. Rest in peace to Alejandra Eco Chubb, and I can't believe this is reality.
Dude, every hair in my body is standing up. What was that noise? That was a growl or a screech. That literally was like, oh my god, dude. Whoa. Dude, what is that, bro? What the fuck is that? Those were like, I hate to use the D word, but those were not human vocalizations that we just heard. That's fucked. Did we just hear your voice? Oh god, the shadow just scared me. Did we just hear your voice out there? Can you make that noise again? better not asking that. Is it a bad idea for us to take the rosary off of this doll? Dude, those sounds were straight demonic. And it was in this fucking hallway, bro. That was closer than the Hill House was. You should go. You should go, is what it just said to us. Dude, I'm shaking, bro.
I really don't like this.
Why should we go? Is it dangerous to be in here?
What's a crime that happened near you that everyone should know about? I'll go first. This is Kai Zhuang. He's a Chinese foreign exchange student that was staying in Riverdale, Utah when he was cyber kidnapped last week. Kai was reported missing by his high school in Riverdale last Thursday after his family in China told school officials that they received a ransom note and a photo of Kai being held captive and in danger. The ransom note demanded $80,000, which his family paid. Upon investigating, Riverdale police went to the home of Kai's host family, but according to them, they had no idea that Kai was missing. They told authorities that he was sleeping in his bed Wednesday night and could hear him in his room Thursday morning. Police initially thought that he had been forcibly taken from his host home and was being held against his will, but that was not the case. Just a week prior, Kai was stopped by police in Provo, Utah, where they were concerned for his safety for some reason. He was purchasing camping gear and he was ultimately returned to his host family. After learning about this encounter, police used phone data and bank records to piece together where Kai could have possibly gone, because at this point it seemed as if he was trying to go off-grid. Just Sunday morning, Kai was found alive in a makeshift tent in the Utah mountains just outside of Brigham City. According to police, he was very scared and cold as there was no source of heat in the tent outside of a blanket. He also had very little food and water. Inside the tent, police also found multiple phones, which they believe he used to take the photos that were sent to his family in China. Kai told police that he was told by the cyber kidnappers to isolate himself, which he agreed to because he was scared that they were going to hurt him or his family. He said that he was being controlled and manipulated by these kidnappers for weeks, even during the encounter with Provo police, but he didn't tell them or his host family because he was scared. Riverdale police state that he was specifically targeted because he was a foreign exchange student, and he became the subject of an international online kidnapping scheme. After his rescue, he was cleared medically at the scene, made contact with his family back home, and he requested a warm cheeseburger to eat. According to the FBI, cyber kidnapping schemes are happening more and more across the US, and these cyber kidnappers are specifically targeting Chinese exchange students online, threatening their families back home. If you don't know, cyber kidnapping is when an online kidnapper or attacker tells a victim to isolate themselves and to provide them with photos as if they were being held captive. They then send these photos to the victim's family members in exchange for payment, and the victims usually go along with this out of fear of themselves or their families being harmed. Authorities are urging anyone who may be a victim of cyber kidnapping to stop contact with the suspect, don't send them money, and to immediately contact local authorities.
Hillsborough disaster is one of the most infuriating and heartbreaking true crime cases I know. Hillsborough Stadium is located in Sheffield. It was April 1989. The stadium was about to host an FA Cup semi-final game between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. Now the game was obviously highly anticipated and there were loads of fans there eager to cheer their teams on. Now some people actually don't know this, but in 1981 a crush occurred at the ground. This was actually again during a FA Cup game, but it was between Spurs and Wolves. There were 38 injuries, including broken limbs. Luckily no one was killed, but this time the result was fatal. Just prior to kickoff, staff realised there were loads of fans that hadn't yet made it into the ground. Police Commander David Duckenfield ordered that Gate C would be opened. This caused around 2,000 Liverpool fans to surge into the stadium, causing a massive crash. I feel like it's best to get the words of a Hillsborough survivor in order to paint the picture of the true horrors that then unfolded. A Liverpool fan, Neil McDougall, was interviewed. He stated, "I remember watching on in horror and seeing fans on the pitch using advertising hoardings as emergency stretchers. When I looked out across the pitch, it was like a war zone. Bodies were laid out everywhere and they were being carried down to the far end of the stadium. There were people crying everywhere, walking about the pitch in a state of shock." He said, "People were running around in circles in sheer desperation, doing their best to help those who were dying. Every so often you'd hear a small cheer as someone was brought back to life on the pitch, only to fade away again. It was like watching a war scene in a movie, but it wasn't a war, it was only a football match, and those people should have never been killed. They should have been safe. Something went horribly wrong on that day." There were a total of 97 deaths and 766 injuries. Now, not only were the deaths themselves an absolute tragedy, but the way that it was handled by police and other professionals was absolutely horrendous. There was complete chaos in identifying the deceased victims. Bodies of people's loved ones were transported to a local gymnasium which acted as a temporary mortuary. Some relatives were made to look through Polaroid pictures of the deceased to identify their loved ones. Other relatives were placed in a holding room, and a hospital administrator came out, stood on a table and started reading descriptions of people in the mortuary. The oldest victim was 67 and the youngest was just 10. Now, in the immediate aftermath of this horrendous tragedy, police and the press spread false stories painting the victims as perpetrators of crimes. The Sun newspaper is now infamous of the absolutely disgusting false stories that they printed about the victims. They lied and made out like the victims were somehow to blame for this, when in actual fact it was a failure of crowd control. The first inquest into the disaster from 1991 stated a verdict of accidental death. Fans and loved ones of the deceased fought to have this overturned for years. Finally, in 2016, it was concluded that the victims were unlawfully killed. Fans played no part in the deaths, and instead it was down to police failures, poor stadium design and a delayed response by the ambulance. There's an absolutely brilliant drama on ITV called Anne, and if you're interested in this disaster, it paints such a good picture of what actually happened and how heartbreaking it was. But just as a disclaimer, I did cry the whole way through.
A missing North Carolina teenager was just found hidden under a trap door in this man's home in a completely different state, and what he has to say about it is horrifying.
She hid on her own free will. She was actually in the bed when the officers first come in there. Her grandma kicked her out. She didn't appear to be that age. She had all kinds of piercings.
In December, a 16-year-old girl left her grandparents' home in North Carolina after a fight and disappeared. She was officially reported missing on December 6th, and her grandparents feared the worst. But what they didn't know was that 3 weeks prior to her disappearance, a 34-year-old man named Zachary Jones found the girl online and started talking to her. And he actually lured her from her home after the fight with her grandparents. Zachary then drove the girl all the way back to his home in Lincoln County, Kentucky, where he repeatedly sexually assaulted her and gave her drugs. Fast forward to Christmas Day. Zachary's mom called 911 to report a domestic violence incident between Zachary and who she thought was his girlfriend. And when police arrived at the home, he said the girl was not there. He was quickly cuffed and placed in the back of a cop car after authorities found drugs in the home. And when they went back inside to search for the girl, they found something incredibly disturbing. Locked inside of a trap door hidden under a rug in Zachary's bedroom was a young girl who authorities say appeared very high. After investigating, the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office realized that the young girl was reported missing nearly a month prior out of North Carolina. According to the girl, whose name has not been released, she said that Zachary initially told her that he was 19 online, but when she met up with him in North Carolina, he looked much older. It was there that he said he was 25, and it wasn't until they got all the way back to his home that she found out that he was actually 34. The girl said that Zachary was always armed with a gun and that he forced her to tell his family that she was 18. He also threatened to kill her many times and proceeded to sexually assault her and give her drugs, sometimes even strangling her during the assaults. When the girl was rescued, Zachary denied choking her and said that she hid in the trap door on her own free will. But the girl had very visible marks on her neck that proved otherwise. The victim also said that on their drive back to his house, they were pulled over by a cop, and Zachary told her that he would shoot the officer if they were asked to get out of the car. Zachary was arrested and is being held at the Pulaski County Jail, while the girl was taken to the hospital for treatment and was reunited with her grandparents. In an interview from jail, Zachary admitted to all of it, but said that she told him that she was 18. He said that she didn't look to be 16 as she had all sorts of piercings, and that he was helping her after her grandparents kicked her out, which was not true. Zachary is facing 30 different charges in just Kentucky, but he's also facing more charges in North Carolina as well. He's being held without bond, and judging by his lack of remorse, I truly hope that he never gets out, because this story is absolutely terrifying.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This woman vanished after meeting someone she met on Facebook. 39-year-old Melissa Lemoine was last seen in Tampa, Florida on the 14th of July 2023. She had been living in Lutz, which is around 15 miles away from Tampa. On the afternoon in question, a family member had dropped her off at the Frontier Travel Park on Nebraska Avenue. She had apparently been planning to meet with someone that she had met online on Facebook. The pair had apparently been speaking for a while, and it was planned that she would come straight back home that day. Now, the person that she had been communicating with remains unknown, and Melissa never made it back that day. She has not been seen or heard from since. Obviously concerned when she never came home, her family reported her missing straight away. They've made numerous calls to Melissa's phone to try and get hold of her, and originally the phone was ringing out, but now it just goes straight to answer phone. Anyone with any information, no matter how small they think it might be, is encouraged to get in contact with the police.
This is the disturbing truth about Danny Phantom. Okay, so we all know who Danny Phantom is and Timmy Turner. But have you ever wondered why they look exactly the same? Well, that's because the show Danny Phantom is actually Timmy Turner's life as a teenager. After Timmy made his last wish to make him and all of his friends superheroes, Timmy grew up to be Danny Phantom, Chester grew up to be Dash, Trixie grew up to be Paulina, Tootie grew up to be Sam, and AJ grew up to be Tucker. And all of these characters kinda look exactly the same, just in different grown-up versions. And the crazy thing is, you can actually see them grown up in Danny Phantom. Many people believe this to be true, and others don't believe it at all. Like, for example, the eye colors are completely different, and even the skin tone on some of the characters. But what do you think about this? Do you think Danny Phantom is just Timmy Turner grown up? And if so, let me know in the comments. Everybody loved these two shows, and just imagine if they were actually connected. In my opinion, this theory is absolutely mind-blowing, and I kinda hope it turns out to be true.
I accidentally killed my husband by pushing him from the 25th floor during an argument. My name is Amber Hilberling, and I was 19 years old at the time. My story is a mix of tragedy and injustice. On that day, my husband and I were in the midst of a dispute, and there had been instances in the past where he had been physically abusive towards me. At just 19 years old and 5 months pregnant, the worst happened. Throughout our 11 months of marriage, my husband Joshua, a former military personnel, made my life a living hell due to the domestic violence he subjected me to. During that fatal argument, Joshua violently grabbed me, and in a reflex of self-defense, I pushed him, causing him to fall from the 25th floor of our building through a window in our apartment that shattered upon impact. During my trial, investigators cast doubt on the jurors' minds by mentioning that nothing in the living room indicated a violent dispute had taken place. Consequently, I was sentenced to 25 years in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. I gave birth to our son while in custody. I appealed the decision, but my request was denied in 2014. The loneliness and pain of watching my child grow up far from me overwhelmed me. I was found dead in my cell, hanged at the age of 24.
When marriage turns to murder, this is the horrific story of Angie and Jared. Angie was just 21 when her new husband beheaded her, just 3 months after they got married. Angie and Jared got married in October 2022 in a ceremony that friends and family weren't invited to. Friends of Angie described Jared as quite jealous and controlling, and he treated Angie like a possession. Angie recently told a friend that she wanted to have kids with Jared, but her friend advised her to get to know him more and just enjoy being a couple. There had been previous disturbances reported at their home, but nothing major. However, Angie's friends do believe she was a victim of domestic violence leading up to her death. Officers were called out to their home on January 11th. Jared was at the scene, and when officers went inside, they found the headless body of Angie. She was found laid on their bedroom floor in a pool of blood with multiple stab wounds to her back. Her head was found in the shower. Bizarrely, there is CCTV footage from the store where Angie worked that shows Jared walk in, grab a beer from the fridge, walk out without paying, drink it in the parking lot, and then drive away. This footage is thought to be just after Angie's death. Jared was arrested for Angie's murder and he did confess to killing her. His bond is currently set at $500,000.
This man cut his mum up, ate her, and also fed her to his dog. Alberto Gomez is a 30-year-old former Spanish waiter. In 2019, when he was just 26 years old, a shocking crime was exposed. Police were called to his family home in Madrid in February 2019. Alberto's mum, Maria Gomez, hadn't been seen for a while. Her concerned friend had called the police to request a welfare check on her. Police searched her property and found something absolutely